Zelda Harker clutched the letter that would change her life, her hands trembling as she read the words again. Dearest cousin, we await your arrival in Promise Creek with great anticipation. The journey west may be arduous, but the possibilities that await you here are boundless. The year was 1876, and at 22 years of age, with no prospects in Boston following her parents' passing, Zelda had little choice but to accept her distant relative's offer of a new beginning in the Montana Territory. The stagecoach rattled mercilessly over the uneven terrain, jolting Zelda from her fitful slumber. 5 days of travel had left her exhausted, her simple gray traveling dress crumpled and her chestnut hair falling from its once neat arrangement. She gazed out the window at the vast, open landscape so different from the crowded streets of Boston and wondered what awaited her in Promise Creek. Not much longer now, miss, the elderly gentleman seated across from her said kindly. Promise Creek's just beyond that ridge. Zelda offered a grateful smile. Thank you, sir. I admit I'm rather nervous about meeting my relatives. It's been many years since we've had any correspondence. The man nodded sympathetically. The Hendersons are good folk. You'll be in capable hands with them. As the stagecoach crested the hill, Zelda caught her first glimpse of Promise Creek, a small but bustling town nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling grasslands and distant mountains. The sight both relieved and terrified her. This remote outpost would be her home now. The coach rolled down the main street, past wooden storefronts, a small church, and the Promise Creek Hotel before coming to a stop outside the general store. Zelda gathered her modest belongings, one trunk and a carpetbag, and stepped down onto the dusty street. Zelda Harker. A plump woman with graying hair hurried toward her, a warm smile on her face. I'm your cousin, Martha Henderson. My stars, you've finally arrived. Martha enveloped Zelda in an enthusiastic embrace that momentarily stole her breath. When she pulled back, Martha's smile faltered slightly as she studied Zelda's face. Well now, you certainly favor your mother around the eyes, though I dare say the journey has left you looking a bit peaked. No matter, some good home cooking will set that right. Zelda smoothed her wrinkled dress self-consciously. It's lovely to meet you, Cousin Martha. Thank you for taking me in. Nonsense, dear. Family is family. Now George will fetch your trunk and we'll get you settled. You must be exhausted. Martha's husband George, a quiet man with kind eyes, loaded Zelda's trunk onto their wagon while Martha introduced Zelda to what seemed like half the town's population. By the time they set off for the Henderson farm, Zelda's head was spinning with names and faces. Everyone's quite curious about you, Martha explained as the wagon rumbled out of town. We don't get many newcomers from back east, especially unmarried ladies. Zelda's stomach tightened at the implication in Martha's words. I hope I didn't disappoint them. Martha patted Zelda's hand. Not at all, dear, though I must say from your mother's letters I expected you might be a bit more. Well, like her, she was quite the beauty in her day. Yes, I've been told I take after my father's side, Zelda replied softly, the familiar ache of inadequacy settling in her chest. The Henderson farm was modest but welcoming, with a 2-story farmhouse, a barn, and various outbuildings situated on several acres of land. 2 children, a boy of about 12 and a girl perhaps 10, ran out to greet them, their faces alight with curiosity. Children, this is your cousin Zelda from Boston, Martha announced. Zelda, these are our youngest, Timothy and Alice. How do you do? Zelda smiled, grateful for their uncomplicated welcome. That evening, after a hearty meal and settling into the small but comfortable bedroom that would be hers, Zelda stood before the spotted mirror hanging on the wall. The face that looked back at her was unremarkable brown eyes, neither large nor small, a straight nose, lips that were perhaps too thin, and chestnut hair that stubbornly refused to hold a curl. Not ugly, certainly, but plain, ordinary, the kind of face that blended into crowds. In Boston, this had been a source of quiet anguish, especially when compared to her beautiful, vivacious mother. Here, in Promise Creek, perhaps it wouldn't matter so much. The next morning brought Zelda's first full day in Promise Creek, and Martha wasted no time integrating her into their household routine. By midday, Zelda's hands were raw from helping with laundry, and her back ached from churning butter, but she welcomed the physical exertion. It left less time for homesickness or worry about her uncertain future. "We'll head into town after lunch," Martha announced as they sat down to a simple meal of bread and stew. "Mrs. Powell at the dress shop is eager to meet you, and we need supplies from the general store." "That sounds lovely," Zelda replied, though the prospect of more introductions made her stomach knot with anxiety. Promise Creek's Main Street was busy with afternoon activity when they arrived. Martha led Zelda first to Powell's dress shop, where a rail, thin woman with bright eyes and a measuring tape draped around her neck greeted them warmly. "So this is the Boston cousin," Mrs. Powell exclaimed, circling Zelda with professional interest. "Let me look at you, dear." Zelda stood uncomfortably as the woman assessed her from head to toe. She was accustomed to such appraisals, having endured them from countless matrons in Boston society who had ultimately found her wanting. "Well," Mrs. Powell finally said, "you've a good figure at least. Though we'll need to find colors that don't wash you out quite so much as that gray, perhaps a nice rust or forest green to give you some color." "Zelda's just arrived with her traveling clothes," Martha interjected kindly. "We'll be making her some proper dresses soon enough." Their next stop was Nelson's General Store, a large establishment filled with everything from food staples to tools, fabric, and household goods. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and a gray-haired man behind the counter looked up with a smile. "Afternoon, Martha. This must be your cousin from back east." "Indeed it is, Harold. Zelda, this is Harold Nelson, proprietor of our finest and only general store." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Nelson," Zelda said politely. The store was busy with customers, and Zelda found herself drifting toward a display of books while Martha gossiped with Harold. She was examining a copy of Little Women when the bell above the door jingled again, and a sudden hush fell over the store. Curious, Zelda turned to see a tall man standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair, and stepped inside with the easy confidence of a mountain lion entering its territory. Everything about him spoke of the West, from his worn leather boots to the revolver holstered at his hip. "Afternoon, ladies." "Harold," he nodded to the storekeeper, his voice deep and unhurried. "Jake, didn't expect to see you in town so soon," Harold replied with evident pleasure. "Thought you'd be out at the Diamond End for another week at least. Cattle drive finished early. Thought I'd restock before heading back." The man Jake scanned the store, his gaze pausing when it reached Zelda. Martha hurried over, dragging Zelda forward. "Jake Newland, this is my cousin Zelda Harker, newly arrived from Boston. Zelda, Jake owns the Diamond End Ranch north of town, one of our most successful cattlemen." Jake Newland's eyes were the clear blue of a summer sky, startling against his sun-darkened skin. They assessed Zelda with frank interest, causing heat to rise in her cheeks. "Miss Harker," he said, touching the brim of the hat he held in his hands. "Welcome to Promise Creek." "Thank you, Mr. Newland," Zelda replied, finding her voice. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, as though he found something amusing in her formal Eastern manners. "The pleasure's mine. How are you finding our little town after the big city?" "It's different," Zelda admitted, "but everyone has been very welcoming." "Everyone except the climate, I'd wager," he said, noting her sunburned nose with a glance. "Takes some getting used to." Before Zelda could respond, Harold called Jake over to discuss an order, and Martha whisked Zelda away to look at fabric. "That's quite a man, our Jake Newland," Martha murmured once they were out of earshot. "Came here with nothing 10 years ago and built the Diamond Inn into the finest ranch in the territory. Every unmarried woman for 50 miles has set her cap for him, but he seems content with his bachelor ways." "He seems capable," Zelda replied neutrally, though she couldn't deny a certain fascination with the rancher's confident presence. "Capable indeed, and handsome as the devil, though I'm sure you've seen far more refined gentlemen in Boston." Zelda thought of the pale, proper young men her mother had once hoped she might attract. None of them had possessed the raw vitality that Jake Newland exuded effortlessly. "Eastern gentlemen are different," was all she said. They completed their shopping, and Zelda was relieved when Jake Newland departed before them, tipping his hat in farewell as he passed. Something about his direct gaze made her feel exposed, as though he could see past her careful manners to the uncertainty beneath. Over the next 2 weeks, Zelda settled into life at the Henderson farm. She learned to cook on a wood stove, helped with the vegetable garden, and began teaching young Alice to read better. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her sheltered Boston existence had never been. On Sundays, the family attended services at Promise Creek's small church, where Zelda met more of the community. She noticed how the young women preened when Jake Newland entered, and how mothers with eligible daughters made sure to position their families nearby. For his part, the rancher was polite but reserved, speaking briefly with the minister and a few other men before departing promptly after the service. "Such a shame about Jake," Zelda overheard one matron whisper to another as they left the church on her 3rd Sunday. "A man in his position should have a wife, but he barely glances at any of our girls." Well, Emmeline tried hard enough with her Sarah, and that winter's widow has been bringing him pies for months. They say he's still grieving his fiancée, though it's been 5 years since she died of fever. Zelda pretended not to listen, but found herself wondering about the woman Jake Newland had loved and lost. Had she been beautiful, spirited, the sort of woman who would thrive in this untamed country? The following Thursday, Martha announced they would attend a barn raising at the Mackenzie farm on Saturday. "Everyone will be there," she explained. "The whole community turns out to help when a family needs a new barn. There'll be food and dancing afterward, a perfect opportunity for you to meet more people." Zelda spent Friday helping Martha and Alice prepare dishes for the communal feast: apple pies, fried chicken, and biscuits that would travel well to the Mackenzie farm 5 miles outside of town. On Saturday morning, Zelda dressed in her best dress, a dark blue cotton with white trim that Mrs. Powell had helped alter to fit her better. She attempted to arrange her hair in a becoming style, but the dry climate made it even more resistant to curling than usual. Finally, she settled for a simple knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with a blue ribbon that matched her dress. When she came downstairs, Martha looked her over with a critical eye. "That blue is better than the gray, certainly, but perhaps a bit of color in your cheeks." Before Zelda could protest, Martha was pinching her cheeks vigorously. "There, that's a bit livelier." The Mackenzie farm was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Men of all ages were hard at work on the barn's frame, while women organized food tables and children darted about underfoot. Zelda was immediately put to work helping arrange plates and utensils, grateful for the task that spared her from standing awkwardly alone. As midday approached, and the work on the barn progressed impressively, Zelda found herself looking for Jake Newland among the workers. She finally spotted him atop the barn frame, hammering boards into place alongside other men. Even from a distance, his strength was evident in the easy way he handled heavy beams. "Admiring the view?" a friendly voice asked, making Zelda jump. A young woman about her own age stood beside her, smiling knowingly. "I'm Abigail Carter, by the way. You must be Martha's cousin from back east." "Zelda Harker," she confirmed, embarrassed at being caught staring. "And I was just impressed by how quickly they're building the barn." "MMHMM," Abigail's smile widened. "Jake Newland has that effect on most women. Though you shouldn't get your hopes up, he barely notices any of us local girls, so I doubt an Eastern lady would catch his eye." The casual cruelty of the remark stung, though Zelda kept her expression neutral. "I assure you I have no such aspirations. I was merely observing the construction." Abigail shrugged. "No offense meant, it's just that Jake's particular about women. His fiancée, Eliza, was a real beauty, golden hair, blue eyes, the kind of face that turns every head in a room." She glanced sideways at Zelda. "Most men around here appreciate a pretty face, even if they settle for less in the end." Before Zelda could respond to this thinly veiled insult, Martha called for help bringing more food to the tables, and Zelda gratefully escaped Abigail's company. The barn raising continued through the afternoon, and by sunset, the structure was nearly complete, a testament to the community's collective skill and determination. As the men finished the last essential tasks, the women laid out a magnificent feast on long tables. Lanterns were hung, and someone produced a fiddle and harmonica for music. Zelda helped serve food, keeping herself busy to avoid conversation. She had just refilled a lemonade pitcher when a deep voice behind her said, "You've been working harder than some of the men on the barn." She turned to find Jake Newland standing there, his shirt damp with honest sweat, his face tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishment. "I doubt that's true, Mr. Newland," she replied. "Serving lemonade hardly compares to raising a barn." "Every contribution matters in a community like ours, Miss Harker." He accepted a cup of lemonade from her with a nod of thanks. "How are you settling in to Promise Creek?" "Quite well, thank you. The Hendersons have been very kind. Martha mentioned you taught school back east." Zelda was surprised Martha had shared this detail and that Jake had remembered it. "For a brief time, yes. After my parents passed, I taught at a small girls' school in Boston. We could use a proper teacher here. The minister's wife does her best, but with 20 children of all ages, it's more about keeping them occupied than real teaching." "I would enjoy teaching again," Zelda admitted. "Though I'm not sure the town council would consider me qualified." Jake's blue eyes studied her face. "Don't sell yourself short, Miss Harker. Promise Creek needs educated people willing to put down roots." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a pretty young woman with golden curls who placed a possessive hand on Jake's arm. "Jake Newland, you promised me the first dance," she pouted prettily. "The music's about to start." "Did I?" Jake looked genuinely puzzled but good-naturedly allowed himself to be pulled away. "Excuse me, Miss Harker." Zelda watched as the young woman, Sarah Miller, if she remembered correctly from church introductions, led Jake toward the area being cleared for dancing. She felt a strange hollowness in her chest that she refused to acknowledge as disappointment. The evening progressed with music, dancing, and merriment. Zelda danced several times with George Henderson's older sons and other young men from town, but found herself constantly aware of Jake Newland's location. He danced with several women, always polite but never lingering with any particular partner. As the celebration began to wind down, Zelda sought a moment of quiet, stepping away from the lantern light to gaze up at the star-filled sky. The vastness of it still amazed her, so different from Boston's narrow views between tall buildings. "Beautiful night," Jake's voice came from behind her, causing her heart to skip. "Yes," she agreed, not turning around. "I've never seen so many stars." He moved to stand beside her, his gaze also directed upward. "One advantage of being out here in the middle of nowhere, I suppose." "It doesn't feel like nowhere," Zelda said softly. "It feels like possibility." Jake glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most Easterners see nothing but hardship and isolation in this country." "There's that too," she acknowledged with a small smile. "But also freedom, space to become whatever one chooses. And what do you choose to become in Promise Creek, Miss Harker?" The question was direct, challenging even, but Zelda found she didn't mind. "I'm not entirely sure yet. Useful, I hope. Perhaps a teacher, as you suggested. A worthy ambition." He was silent for a moment, then said, "I should see you safely back to the celebration before your cousin sends out a search party." The evening ended soon after, and the Hendersons gathered their belongings for the journey home. As they were preparing to leave, Jake approached their wagon. "Henderson," he addressed George, "I'll be driving cattle to the north pasture next week. If you've got time to help, I'd appreciate it, paying fair wages, of course." "Could use the extra money," George nodded. "Timothy's old enough to handle things here for a day or two." "Much obliged." Jake's eyes briefly met Zelda's. "Good evening, ladies. Miss Harker." As they drove home under the starlit sky, Zelda found herself replaying her brief conversations with Jake Newland, analyzing each word and glance. She chided herself for this foolishness. A man like him would have no interest in someone as ordinary as her, especially if he had once loved a great beauty. Yet she couldn't quite dismiss the warmth she'd felt in his presence. The following week brought a welcome development when Martha returned from town with news. "The town council is considering opening a proper schoolhouse, and your name came up as a potential teacher." "My name?" Zelda was astonished. "How did they even know I taught in Boston?" "Jake Newland mentioned it, apparently." He's on the council, being one of our most prosperous citizens. They want to meet with you next Monday to discuss the possibility. Zelda's mind whirled with this unexpected opportunity and the knowledge that Jake Newland had advocated for her. I would be honored to meet with them, she said, trying to contain her excitement. It would be a fine position for you, Martha said thoughtfully. Though of course once you marry, you'd have to give it up. I have no immediate plans to marry Cousin Martha, Zelda reminded her gently. Martha patted her hand. Of course, dear, though I must say several young men seemed quite taken with you at the barn raising. Robert Carter, for one, couldn't take his eyes off you. Zelda remembered Robert Abigail Carter's older brother, a pleasant but unremarkable young man who had danced with her twice. The thought that he might be interested in courting her was both flattering and anxiety-inducing. Monday arrived with Zelda feeling both nervous and determined as she prepared for her meeting with the town council. She wore her blue dress again, having carefully pressed it, and arranged her hair as neatly as possible. Martha lent her a cameo brooch to wear at her throat, saying it added a touch of refinement. The council meeting was held in a back room of the church, where 5 men sat around a large table. Mayor Hopkins, a portly man with impressive whiskers, greeted Zelda warmly. Harold Nelson from the general store was there, as was the minister, Reverend Clark. The 4th man was a rancher whose name Zelda couldn't recall, and then there was Jake Newland, who acknowledged her with a simple nod. Miss Harker, thank you for joining us, Mayor Hopkins began. As you may know, Promise Creek has been making do with informal schooling arrangements, but our community is growing. We believe it's time for a proper school with a dedicated teacher. I think that's a wonderful idea, Zelda replied, her initial nervousness fading as the discussion turned to education, a subject she was passionate about. For the next hour, the council asked Zelda about her teaching experience, her education, and her ideas for a Promise Creek school. She answered thoughtfully, occasionally becoming animated when discussing teaching methods or the books she would recommend for the school library. Throughout the discussion, she was aware of Jake watching her with those penetrating blue eyes, saying little but seeming to absorb every word. When he did speak, it was to ask surprisingly insightful questions about how she would handle children of different ages and abilities in one classroom. I believe in tailoring instruction to each child's level, she explained. Older students can help teach younger ones, which reinforces their own learning while allowing me to work more closely with those who need additional attention. As the meeting concluded, Mayor Hopkins smiled broadly. Well, Miss Harker, I think I speak for all of us when I say we're impressed with your qualifications and your vision for our school. The other men nodded in agreement, and Zelda felt a surge of hope. There are practical matters to consider, Jake said, his voice measured. We'll need to find a suitable building, furnish it properly, acquire books and supplies, and determine a fair salary for Miss Harker. All excellent points, the mayor agreed. Mr. Newland, since you've taken such an interest in this project, perhaps you'd be willing to head a committee to address these matters. Something flickered across Jake's face, reluctance, perhaps, but he nodded. I'll see to it. Miss Harker, if you're amenable, it might be helpful to have your input on the school's requirements. Of course, Zelda agreed, trying to keep her voice even despite the unexpected thrill at the prospect of working with him. As the meeting adjourned and Zelda prepared to leave, Jake approached her. If you have time tomorrow afternoon, Miss Harker, we could begin discussing the school's needs. Say 2 o'clock at the general store. That would be fine, Mr. Newland. Thank you for your support of the school. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Education matters out here, perhaps even more than back east. These children will build the future of this territory. Outside the church, Zelda found Martha waiting eagerly for news. They're going to establish a proper school, Zelda reported happily. And they seem inclined to hire me as the teacher. Wonderful news, Martha exclaimed, linking her arm through Zelda's as they began walking home. And I couldn't help but notice Jake Newland taking quite an interest in the proceedings. He's simply concerned about the educational needs of the community, Zelda protested, though her cheeks warmed. Martha hummed skeptically. Jake Newland has never shown particular interest in schooling before, but he certainly seemed interested in something today. Zelda chose to ignore this comment, instead describing the council's questions and the plans for finding a suitable school building. The next day, Zelda arrived at the general store precisely at 2 o'clock, having spent the morning helping Martha with household chores and the early afternoon fretting over what to wear for her meeting with Jake. She had finally settled on a simple brown skirt and cream-colored blouse, practical but neat. Jake was already there, examining a shelf of tools when she entered. He turned at the sound of the bell, and Zelda thought she detected a brief softening of his expression before he nodded in greeting. "Miss Harker, thank you for being prompt." "Of course, Mr. Newland, I'm eager to discuss the school." Harold Nelson approached, wiping his hands on his apron. "Jake's already told me about the council's decision. Fine idea, a proper school for our youngsters. You can use the back room for your meeting, more private than out here with customers coming and going." The back room was small but tidy, with a desk and several chairs. Jake gestured for Zelda to sit, then took a seat across from her, placing a notebook and pencil on the desk between them. "I thought we might start by listing what you consider essential for a functioning schoolhouse," he said. "Then we can determine costs and begin looking for a suitable location." For the next hour, they worked together companionably, discussing everything from desks and blackboards to books and writing materials. Jake took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions or offering practical suggestions about what might be available locally versus what would need to be ordered from Denver or even back east. Zelda found herself enjoying the straightforward way he approached problems, without the social niceties that often obscured meaning in her Boston circles. When she mentioned a desire for maps and a globe, he didn't dismiss it as an unnecessary luxury, but simply noted it as something to be acquired when funds permitted. "You seem to value education highly, Mr. Newland," she observed during a pause in their discussion. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of memory, perhaps. "I had little formal schooling myself, mostly learned from my mother until I was 10, then worked alongside my father until he died when I was 16, came west on my own after that." He tapped his pencil against the notebook. "I've had to teach myself most of what I know about business and ranching. It would have been easier with a proper education." This glimpse into his past intrigued Zelda. "Yet you've built a successful ranch despite those challenges." "I've been fortunate," he said simply, "and stubborn. A useful quality in this country, I imagine." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "It can be, though some might call it by less flattering names." Their conversation was interrupted by Harold, who entered with a pot of coffee and 2 cups. "Thought you might need refreshment." "How's the planning coming along?" "Very well," Jake replied. "Miss Harker has a clear vision for what the school requires." "Excellent, excellent," Harold beamed. "The whole town's buzzing about the new school, you know, and about our new teacher." He winked at Zelda. "You're quite the topic of conversation these days, Miss Harker." After Harold left, an awkward silence fell. Finally, Jake cleared his throat. "People talk a great deal in small towns, Miss Harker. You'll get used to it." "I'm sure," Zelda replied, though the thought of being gossiped about made her uncomfortable. "Shall we continue with our list?" By the end of their meeting, they had compiled a comprehensive inventory of needs for the new school and discussed several potential locations. Jake promised to investigate the possibilities and meet with her again later in the week. As they prepared to leave, Jake hesitated, then said, "Miss Harker, I should warn you that taking this position will put you under considerable scrutiny in Promise Creek. Small communities can be both supportive and intrusive. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Newland, but I'm determined to establish this school properly. I can weather a little gossip if it means providing education for the children here." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you can at that. Good day, Miss Harker." Over the next few weeks, Zelda met regularly with Jake and occasionally other members of the newly formed school committee. They settled on converting an unused storage building near the church into a schoolhouse, and Jake personally oversaw the renovations. Zelda was touched by his commitment to the project, though he always maintained a certain professional distance in their interactions. Meanwhile, life at the Henderson farm continued, with Zelda becoming increasingly integrated into the family's routines. She noticed, however, that Martha had begun inviting various eligible young men to Sunday dinners, Robert Carter among them, and creating situations where Zelda would be left alone with them for conversation. "Robert is such a steady young man," Martha remarked after one such dinner. "His family's farm is quite prosperous, and he'll inherit it all one day." "He seems very nice," Zelda agreed noncommittally. Martha sighed. "Zelda, dear, I hope you don't think me interfering, but a young woman in your position should consider her prospects carefully. Teaching is all very well, but a woman needs a home and family of her own. I understand your concern, Cousin Martha, but I'm not ready to consider marriage just yet. The school will be opening soon, and I want to focus on making it successful." "Of course, dear," Martha patted her hand. "Though I must say, not everyone in town understands your dedication to this teaching position." "What do you mean?" Zelda asked, suddenly alert. Martha looked uncomfortable. "Well, there's been some talk. Some people wonder why Jake Newland has taken such an interest in the school project." "And in you." Zelda felt her cheeks flame. "Mr. Newland is simply committed to improving Promise Creek. There's nothing more to it than that." "I'm sure you're right," Martha said soothingly. "Though Abigail Carter was telling everyone at the quilting circle that she saw you two walking together by the creek last Wednesday, deep in conversation." "We were discussing school books," Zelda exclaimed, mortified. "Mr. Newland was on his way to his ranch, and we happened to be going in the same direction for part of the way." Martha looked skeptical, but dropped the subject, leaving Zelda to wonder if her frequent meetings with Jake were indeed causing gossip. The thought troubled her not for her own sake, but because she wouldn't want to damage his standing in the community. The next time they met, at the nearly completed schoolhouse, Zelda found herself watching Jake more carefully, looking for any sign that he might be aware of the town's gossip. He seemed the same as always, competent, direct, occasionally revealing a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. They were discussing the arrangement of desks when Zelda finally gathered the courage to broach the subject. "Mr. Newland, I feel I should mention something. It seems our work together on the school has become a subject of some speculation in town." Jake looked up from the desk he was examining, his expression unreadable. "Small towns run on gossip, Miss Harker. It's rarely worth paying attention to. Nevertheless, I wouldn't want to cause any discomfort for you. If you feel it would be better for another committee member to work with me, no." The word came out sharper than either of them expected. Jake straightened, his jaw tightening. "Unless you're uncomfortable with our arrangement." "Not at all," Zelda assured him. "I value your insights and assistance greatly." "Then let people talk. We're doing important work here." There was something in his tone, a finality that both reassured and intrigued Zelda. Did the gossip truly not bother him? Or was he simply too determined to let it interfere with their project? As summer progressed toward fall, the schoolhouse transformation was completed, and Zelda threw herself into preparing for the first day of classes. 27 children had been registered, ranging in age from 6 to 15, and Zelda spent hours organizing lessons appropriate for different age groups. The school's opening day was set for September 15, 1876, and as the date approached, Zelda's excitement was tempered with anxiety. Would the children accept her? Would the parents approve of her teaching methods? Would she live up to the trust Jake and the council had placed in her? The evening before the school's opening, Zelda was arranging books on the shelves when she heard the schoolhouse door open. She turned to find Jake standing there holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Newland," she greeted him, surprised. "I thought all the supplies had been delivered. This is something extra, a gift for our new schoolteacher." He held out the package, looking almost uncomfortable. Touched, Zelda accepted it. "That's very kind of you." She carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's collected works. "Oh," she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "This is lovely." "You mentioned Shakespeare was a favorite of yours," Jake said, watching her reaction. "I thought you might like having something familiar from back east as you begin this new venture." Zelda was momentarily speechless, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you," she finally managed. "This means more than I can express." Jake nodded, seemingly relieved by her response. You've worked hard to make this school a reality, Miss Harker. I admire your dedication. The school wouldn't exist without your support, she pointed out. Why is education so important to you, Mr. Newland? He was silent for a long moment, and Zelda thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, My father could barely write his own name. My mother taught me to read using a Bible and a farmer's almanac, the only books we owned. When I came west, I brought a few books with me, reading them by lamplight after long days of work. His gaze was distant, lost in memory. Books opened a world beyond my circumstances. Every child deserves that opportunity. In that moment, Zelda felt a deeper connection to Jake Newland than she had to anyone in a very long time. This taciturn rancher, whom many in town found intimidating, understood the transformative power of education in a way few others did. The children of Promise Creek are fortunate to have such an advocate, she said softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The moment was broken by the sound of voices outside. Jake stepped back, his expression closing. That'll be Reverend Clark and his wife. They mentioned stopping by to see the finished schoolhouse. Indeed, the door opened moments later, revealing the minister and his plump, cheerful wife, Mrs. Clark immediately bustled over to Zelda, exclaiming over how wonderful the schoolhouse looked, while the Reverend greeted Jake with a handshake. Ah, Jake, good to see you here. Checking that all is ready for tomorrow, I suppose? Miss Harker has everything well in hand, Jake replied. I was just delivering a final item for the school library. Mrs. Clark had spotted the Shakespeare volume on Zelda's desk and picked it up admiringly. My, what a beautiful book. Is this from the council's budget, Mr. Newland? An awkward pause followed as Jake and Zelda exchanged glances. It's a personal gift, Jake finally said, for the school's library. How generous, Mrs. Clark responded, though her tone had cooled slightly. She placed the book back on the desk with exaggerated care. Well, we won't keep you. I'm sure Miss Harker has much to prepare for tomorrow. After they left, Zelda sighed. I fear we've just provided fresh fuel for the town gossips. Jake's mouth twisted ruefully. Perhaps I should have waited to give you the book. No, Zelda said firmly, picking up the volume and holding it close. I'm honored by your gift, and I won't let small-minded speculation diminish that. Jake looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, certainly, but something else too. Something warmer. You're not what I expected when Martha Henderson first mentioned her eastern cousin was coming to Promise Creek, he said finally. No, Zelda raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? Someone more. He hesitated, searching for the right word, concerned with proprieties. Less willing to stand her ground. I've found that life in Promise Creek requires a certain fortitude, Zelda replied with a small smile, even for school teachers. Jake's answering smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his blue eyes, especially for school teachers. I'll leave you to your preparations, Miss Harker. Good luck tomorrow. Long after he'd gone, Zelda found herself thinking about that smile and the man behind it who continued to surprise her. The first day of school went better than Zelda could have hoped. The children, though initially shy with their new teacher, were eager to learn, and Zelda quickly established a routine that kept all age groups engaged. By the end of the week, she felt she was beginning to understand each child's strengths and challenges. Parents, too, seemed pleased with the new arrangement. Many mothers stopped by after school to meet Zelda properly and express their appreciation for the formal education their children were now receiving. Even some fathers made appearances, curious about this new institution in their community. One afternoon in early October, as Zelda was dismissing the children, she looked up to see Jake leaning against a tree across the schoolyard, watching the proceedings. When the last child had run off toward home, he approached, hat in hand. Mr. Newland, Zelda greeted him. This is an unexpected pleasure. I was in town on business and thought I'd see how our school teacher is faring, he replied. May I walk you home? The prospect of walking through town with Jake, knowing the speculation it would cause, gave Zelda pause. But she found she didn't care as much as she once might have. That would be lovely, thank you. As they strolled toward the Henderson farm, Jake asked thoughtful questions about how the school was progressing, listening intently to Zelda's enthusiastic descriptions of her students' accomplishments and the challenges she was working to overcome. Timothy Henderson has a remarkable mind for mathematics, she told him, though he tries to hide it from the other boys. And young Lily Watson, she can barely afford proper shoes, but she's devouring every book I can find for her. Jake nodded. Jim Watson's had a hard time since his wife died. Good to hear his daughter's doing well. They were passing the general store when Abigail Carter emerged, accompanied by her friend Sarah Miller, the pretty blonde who had claimed Jake for a dance at the barn raising. Both young women stopped short at the sight of Jake and Zelda walking together. "Why, Mr. Newland?" Abigail called out with exaggerated surprise. "What brings you to town on a school day?" "Business with Harold Nelson," Jake replied briefly, nodding to both women. Sarah stepped forward, her golden curls bouncing. "Jake, Mama's been asking when you might come to dinner again. It's been ages. Please give your mother my regards, Miss Miller. I've been busy with the fall roundup." Sarah pouted prettily. "Too busy for friends, Jake. That's not like you." Zelda felt acutely uncomfortable, aware of the pointed look Abigail was giving her. "I should be getting back to the Hendersons," she murmured. "I'll walk with you," Jake said firmly. "Ladies." He nodded to Abigail and Sarah, then guided Zelda past them with a light touch at her elbow. Once they were out of earshot, Zelda said, "You didn't need to accompany me further, Mr. Newland. I know the way, and I wouldn't want to keep you from your friends." Jake's jaw tightened. "Sarah Miller is not my friend. Her mother's been trying to match us for years, despite my clear lack of interest." The bluntness of his statement startled a small laugh from Zelda. "That was rather direct, Mr. Newland." His expression softened slightly. "Jake," he said. "I think after all our work together on the school, you might call me Jake." "Jake," she repeated, liking the sound of it. "Then you must call me Zelda." They continued walking, and Zelda was acutely aware of every place where their arms might brush, every glance they exchanged. Something had shifted between them, though she couldn't quite define what. As they neared the Henderson farm, Jake slowed his pace. "I've been meaning to ask, the school is hosting a harvest celebration at the end of the month, isn't it?" "Yes, the children are preparing recitations and songs to perform for their parents. There will be refreshments afterward. I'd like to attend if that would be appropriate." Zelda looked at him in surprise. "Of course it would be appropriate. You were instrumental in establishing the school." Jake nodded, seeming satisfied. "Then I'll be there." They had reached the Hendersons' front gate and he stopped, turning to face her. "Zelda." Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by Martha's appearance on the porch. "Zelda, there you are, dear." "And Jake Newland, too, what a pleasant surprise." Jake stepped back, touching the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Henderson, just escorting your cousin home from the schoolhouse. How gallant," Martha beamed. "Won't you stay for dinner, Jake? We'd be delighted to have you." Jake hesitated, glancing at Zelda, who found herself hoping he would accept. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, but I should be getting back to the ranch before dark." "Another time then," Martha said, her tone making it clear she would hold him to it. After Jake had gone, Martha linked her arm through Zelda's as they went inside. "Well, well," she said meaningfully. "Jake Newland escorting you home, that's certainly going to set tongues wagging. We simply walked together because he happened to be in town," Zelda protested weakly. Martha hummed, unconvinced. "Jake Newland doesn't happen to do anything, my dear. If he walked you home, it's because he wanted to walk you home." The thought warmed Zelda, though she tried not to read too much into it. Jake had been friendly, certainly, even familiar in asking her to use his first name. But that didn't mean he saw her as anything more than a colleague in their shared educational mission. Yet she couldn't help remembering the way his blue eyes had held hers when he'd said her name, or how something in his manner had softened when they were alone together. For the first time since arriving in Promise Creek, Zelda allowed herself to wonder if perhaps Jake Newland might see in her something that others overlooked. The school's harvest celebration was scheduled for the last Friday in October. Zelda spent the preceding weeks helping the children prepare their performances and decorating the schoolhouse with autumn leaves, corn husks, and hand-drawn pictures of harvest scenes. On the day of the celebration, Zelda arrived early to make final preparations. She wore her best dress, a russet-colored cotton that Martha had helped her make, with a slightly fuller skirt than was fashionable back east but practical for the frontier. She had arranged her hair more carefully than usual, securing it with tortoiseshell combs borrowed from Martha. Parents and siblings began arriving at sunset, filling the schoolhouse with cheerful noise. Zelda greeted each family warmly, especially pleased to see some fathers who rarely participated in school activities. The children, excited and nervous, waited in the small cloakroom until everyone was seated. Zelda had just finished arranging the last of the chairs when the door opened again, and Jake entered. He'd clearly made an effort. With his appearance, his hair was neatly combed, his shirt and jacket clean and pressed. He stood taller than most men in the room, drawing glances from many of the assembled parents. "Welcome, Mr. Newland," Zelda said formally, aware of watchful eyes. "Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it," he replied, his eyes taking in the decorated schoolroom with approval. "Looks like you've been busy." The children did most of the decorating. They're very excited to show what they've learned. Jake found a seat at the back of the room as Zelda called for everyone's attention and the celebration began. For the next hour, children recited poems, sang songs, and demonstrated their new knowledge of arithmetic, geography, and history. Parents beamed with pride, applauding enthusiastically after each performance. Throughout the evening, Zelda was conscious of Jake watching not just the children, but her as well. When she spoke about the progress the school had made and thanked the community for their support, she found her eyes drawn to his, finding there an approval that meant more to her than the general applause. After the formal presentations, refreshments were served: cider, cookies, and cakes contributed by the mothers. The atmosphere became festive as children ran about showing their schoolwork to parents and siblings. Zelda was speaking with Mrs. Watson about her daughter Lily's reading progress when she became aware of a commotion near the refreshment table. Abigail Carter's voice rose above the general chatter, sharp with malice. "Think she's something special because she's from Boston, but anyone can see she's plain as a fence post. Just using the school to try to catch a husband, if you ask me." Zelda froze, mortification washing over her as she realized many conversations had stopped, people turning to look between her and Abigail. She desperately wanted to disappear, to be anywhere but under the scrutiny of these people whose acceptance she'd been working so hard to earn. Before she could decide what to do, Jake's voice cut through the awkward silence. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone deadly quiet but carrying clearly through the room, "I'd thank you to show some respect for our teacher, who has done more for this community in 2 months than some have done in years of living here." Abigail blanched, clearly not having realized Jake was within earshot. I only meant, I know exactly what you meant," Jake interrupted, his eyes hard, "and it reflects poorly on you, not Miss Harker." The room had gone completely silent now, everyone watching the confrontation. Zelda felt she should say something, diffuse the situation somehow, but words failed her. It was Martha Henderson who broke the tension, stepping forward with a bright smile. "More cider, anyone, and I believe there's still plenty of Mrs. Miller's excellent apple cake left." Gradually, conversations resumed, though Zelda noticed Abigail Carter and her mother leaving shortly afterward, faces tight with embarrassment. She managed to continue her duties as hostess, thanking parents for coming and answering questions about the school's curriculum. But inside, she felt hollow with humiliation. As the celebration wound down and families began to leave, Zelda busied herself cleaning up, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She was stacking plates when she sensed someone behind her and turned to find Jake standing there, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes, of course," she replied automatically, though her hands trembled slightly as she set down the plates. "It was nothing." "School teachers are often the subject of gossip, I'm told." Jake's jaw tightened. What Abigail Carter said was cruel and untrue. "It doesn't matter," Zelda insisted, though the words had cut deeper than she wanted to admit. The evening was a success overall. The children performed beautifully. "Zelda," Jake's voice was gentle but insistent. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his, expecting pity but finding instead a fierce intensity that took her breath away. "You are not plain," he said, each word deliberate. "You are intelligent, compassionate, and stronger than most men I know. Don't let the petty jealousy of someone like Abigail Carter make you doubt yourself." Zelda stared at him, stunned by the vehemence of his defense. "I thank you," she managed finally. "But truly, it's not important what people think of my appearance." "No, it isn't," Jake agreed, "but it matters that you know your worth." He hesitated, then added more softly, "and that you know how others see you." There was something in his eyes, a warmth, a tenderness she'd never seen there before that made Zelda's heart beat faster. For a wild moment, she thought he might say more, might even reach for her. But then Martha called from across the room, asking if Zelda was ready to leave, and the moment was broken. Jake stepped back, his expression closing. "I should go. It's a long ride back to the ranch." "Of course," Zelda said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Thank you again for coming." "And for what you said earlier." He nodded once, then turned to leave. Zelda watched him go, wondering if she had imagined the emotion in his eyes or if something had truly passed between them in that brief, unguarded moment. The following weeks brought the first snow of the season, transforming Promise Creek into a winter wonderland. The children arrived at school with red cheeks and excitement, building snowmen during recess and drawing snow scenes during art lessons. Zelda found herself settling into a comfortable routine, growing more confident in her role as teacher and more at home in the small frontier community. Jake had been absent from town since the harvest celebration, busy with winter preparations at his ranch. Zelda told herself she wasn't disappointed by his absence, that their relationship was that of colleagues and perhaps friends, nothing more. Yet she found herself watching the schoolhouse door each day, hoping he might stop by. As Thanksgiving approached, excitement built in Promise Creek. The town planned a community celebration to be held in the church, with each family contributing to a grand feast. Martha was in her element, planning elaborate dishes and insisting that Zelda help prepare pies and preserves for the occasion. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Zelda was keeping the children inside during recess due to a particularly bitter cold snap. They were playing quiet games when a commotion outside drew their attention. Looking out the window, Zelda saw a wagon pulled by 2 horses stopping in front of the schoolhouse. To her surprise, Jake Newland was driving it, accompanied by a ranch hand. "Children, continue with your games," Zelda instructed, trying to keep her voice steady as she went to the door. Jake was already climbing down from the wagon, stamping his feet against the cold. When he saw Zelda in the doorway, a rare smile lightened his face. "Miss Harker," he greeted her, "I hope we're not disrupting your class." "Not at all," Zelda replied, conscious of curious little faces pressed against the schoolhouse windows. "What brings you to town on such a cold day?" Jake gestured to the wagon, which Zelda now saw was loaded with firewood. "Thought the school might need extra wood for the winter. This cold snap's likely to continue according to the almanac." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Zelda smiled warmly. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Newland." "We were indeed running low. Jake and his man will stack it for you," Martha's voice came from behind Zelda. The older woman had been helping with the younger children that morning and now stood in the doorway, her expression knowingly amused. "Why don't you take the children for a singing lesson while the men work, Zelda?" For the next half hour, Zelda led the children in songs, trying not to be distracted by the sound of Jake and his ranch hand stacking wood behind the schoolhouse. When they finished, Martha insisted that Zelda offer them coffee before they departed. "You must be frozen," Zelda said, pouring steaming coffee into cups for both men while the children worked on their arithmetic. "Thank you again for the firewood." Jake accepted the coffee gratefully, his hands brushing hers as he took the cup. "Just being neighborly," he said, though his eyes held that warmth she'd seen at the harvest celebration. "Will you be at the Thanksgiving gathering?" "Yes, with the Hendersons, will you?" "I usually make an appearance," he replied, "though I don't stay long. Too many people asking why a man my age isn't married yet." The last was said with a wry twist of his lips that made Zelda smile. "I can sympathize. Martha has been introducing me to every unmarried man within 20 miles, despite my protests that I'm quite content as I am." Jake's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Are you content here in Promise Creek? Zelda considered the question honestly. Yes, she said finally. More than I expected to be. The school, the children, it feels like meaningful work, like I belong here. Jake nodded, something like satisfaction in his gaze. Good, the town needs you. He hesitated, then added more softly, Promise Creek is better with you in it, Zelda Harker. Before she could respond to this unexpected declaration, one of the younger children called for her help with a problem, and the moment was lost. Jake and his man departed soon after, with Jake promising to see her at the Thanksgiving celebration. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing Promise Creek in pristine white. The Hendersons bundled up in their warmest clothes for the short journey to town, with George driving the wagon while Martha fussed over keeping the food warm under thick blankets. The church was transformed for the occasion, with long tables set up in the main hall and decorations of pine boughs and dried berries adorning the walls. Nearly every family in the area had arrived, creating a cheerful cacophony as dishes were arranged and greetings exchanged. Zelda helped Martha set out their contributions: 3 pies, preserves, and fresh bread, before looking around the crowded room for a familiar tall figure. She spotted Jake standing near the door, deep in conversation with Mayor Hopkins. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the room. He nodded in acknowledgement, the hint of a smile touching his lips. The celebration began with Reverend Clark offering a blessing, followed by a bountiful meal that showcased the community's prosperity despite the frontier conditions. Zelda found herself seated between Martha and Timothy, with Jake several tables away, surrounded by ranchers and farmers. Throughout the meal, Zelda was conscious of Jake's presence, occasionally glancing in his direction only to find him already watching her. Each time their eyes met, a pleasant warmth spread through her chest, a sense of connection that transcended the noisy gathering. After the meal, as people mingled and children played games in the corner, Zelda was helping to clear dishes when Abigail Carter approached her. Zelda tensed, expecting another barbed comment, but to her surprise, Abigail looked uncomfortable rather than malicious. Miss Harker, she began stiffly, I wanted to apologize for my behavior at the harvest celebration. It was unkind and unwarranted. Stunned, Zelda managed a gracious nod. Thank you for saying so, Miss Carter. I appreciate your apology. Abigail glanced toward Jake, who was watching them from across the room with narrowed eyes. I wouldn't want you to think I'm only apologizing because Mr. Newland made his feelings clear, though I suppose that did make me reconsider my actions. With that cryptic statement, Abigail moved away, leaving Zelda puzzled. Had Jake said something to Abigail beyond his public defense of Zelda, and what had Abigail meant about his feelings? Zelda didn't have long to wonder as Jake himself approached a few minutes later. Everything all right? He asked, nodding toward Abigail's retreating figure. Yes, Zelda replied. She apologized, actually. It was unexpected but welcome. Good. Jake seemed satisfied. I was wondering if you might step outside for a moment. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Curious and a little nervous, Zelda agreed. They made their way through the crowded hall and out onto the church's small porch, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snowy ground. The air was bitingly cold, but Zelda barely noticed, focused instead on Jake's serious expression. Is something wrong? She asked when he remained silent, gazing out at the snow-covered town. No, he said, turning to face her. Nothing's wrong. In fact, things are better than they've been in a very long time. He took a deep breath as though steeling himself. Zelda, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've come to admire you greatly. Zelda's heart began to race, but she remained silent, hardly daring to hope what his next words might be. I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings, Jake continued, his normally confident voice uncharacteristically hesitant. But I find myself thinking about you constantly. Your intelligence, your kindness, your courage in coming to this wild place and making it your own. He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. I know there are others in town who might offer you a more comfortable life, men like Robert Carter who could give you a nice home and stability. Jake, Zelda began, but he held up a hand. Please, let me finish before I lose my nerve. He took another deep breath. I heard what Abigail said about you at the harvest celebration, about you being plain, and it made me realize something I should have told you from the start. Zelda's chest tightened, uncertainty making it hard to breathe. You are beautiful, Zelda Harker, Jake said, his voice low and intense. Not in the flashy way of some women, but in a way that grows more remarkable each time I see you. Your eyes when you're teaching, the way your whole face lights up when a child understands something for the first time, your quiet strength that never wavers even when faced with cruelty. He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers. If others can't see that beauty, then they're blind. And if you can't see it yourself, then. He hesitated, then finished softly, then I'll be your mirror every morning, showing you what I see when I look at you. Tears pricked at Zelda's eyes, his words touching a deep place within her that had always yearned to be truly seen, truly valued. Jake, she whispered, I don't know what to say. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You don't have to say anything now, I know this is sudden and you may not feel. Zelda didn't let him finish. Acting on instinct rather than propriety, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating rapidly beneath her palm. I feel it too, she said simply, this connection between us. I've tried to tell myself it was just friendship or professional respect, but it's more than that, isn't it? The relief and joy that transformed Jake's face was answer enough, but he covered her hand with his own and said, much more, at least for me. For me as well, Zelda admitted, a sense of wonder filling her at her own boldness. I've never felt this way before, as though someone truly sees me, not just the parts that are acceptable or proper, but all of me. Jake's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. I see you, Zelda Harker. And what I see is the woman I want to share my life with, if you'll have me. The words hung in the cold air between them, momentous and transformative. Zelda knew that her answer would change the course of her life irrevocably. I would be honored to share my life with you, Jake Newland, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The smile that lit Jake's face was like the sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and warming. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he bent his head toward hers. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise of passion, of understanding, of a future together. When they finally parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the cold air. I should speak to George Henderson, he said. Ask for his blessing as your guardian. Yes, Zelda agreed, though she couldn't bring herself to step away from him just yet. And we should go back inside before we're missed. One more minute, Jake murmured, his arms tightening around her. I've waited months to hold you like this. I can't bear to let you go just yet. Zelda laughed softly, a joy she'd never known filling her heart. I'm not going anywhere, Jake Newland. Not anymore. I've found my home. The Thanksgiving celebration continued late into the evening, with many noticing the change between Zelda and Jake, how their eyes sought each other across the room, the way they gravitated toward one another in conversation. Martha gave Zelda knowing looks but said nothing, seeming content to let the couple announce their understanding in their own time. As winter settled fully over Promise Creek, Zelda and Jake's courtship became the talk of the town. Jake spoke formally with George Henderson, who gave his blessing with evident satisfaction. Sunday dinners at the Henderson farm now included Jake as a regular guest, and he often escorted Zelda to and from school when business brought him to town. Christmas arrived with festivities at the schoolhouse and church, with Jake gifting Zelda a beautiful silver locket containing a small photograph of himself. So you can see how I see you, he explained, through the eyes of someone who loves you. In the spring of 1877, as wildflowers began to dot the prairie, Jake and Zelda were married in a simple ceremony at Promise Creek's church. Zelda wore a dress of pale blue silk that Jake had ordered specially from Denver, and Martha wept happy tears as the couple exchanged vows. Their first home together was the Diamond and Ranch house, a sturdy structure that had previously reflected Jake's bachelor status in its sparse furnishings and practical layout. With Zelda's touch, it gradually transformed into a warm home filled with books, colorful textiles, and eventually, the sounds of children's laughter. Zelda continued teaching at the Promise Creek School for 2 more years, until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Jake's mother. A son, David, followed 2 years later, and another daughter, Clara, 2 years after that. As their family grew, so did the diamond and ranch, becoming one of the most prosperous in the territory. Jake's business acumen combined with Zelda's organizational skills proved a formidable partnership, and they were respected throughout the region for their fair dealing and community involvement. Each morning, regardless of how busy the day ahead might be, Jake made a point of telling Zelda how beautiful she was to him, not just in appearance, but in spirit and character. And each time, Zelda would smile and remember that snowy Thanksgiving day when he had promised to be her mirror, reflecting back to her the beauty he saw when others had called her plain. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children growing tall and the century drawing to a close, Jake and Zelda stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant golds and purples. Any regrets? Jake asked, his arm around her waist, his once brown hair now streaked with silver. Zelda leaned into his embrace, as comfortable and natural as breathing. Not one, she replied truthfully, though sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never come to Promise Creek. If I'd stayed in Boston teaching at that girls' school. You would have been an excellent teacher there too, Jake said, but I'm selfishly glad you came west instead. As am I, Zelda agreed, turning in his arms to face him. Time had weathered them both, adding lines to their faces and wisdom to their hearts, but when she looked into Jake's blue eyes, she still saw the man who had declared his love on a snowy porch 20 years earlier. Thank you for seeing me, Jake Newland. For being my mirror when I couldn't see myself clearly. Jake's hand came up to cup her cheek, a gesture as familiar and essential as their morning coffee. Thank you for being brave enough to see yourself through my eyes, Zelda Newland. And for making every day of these 20 years more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. As the last light faded from the sky, they shared a kiss that held 2 decades of love, partnership, and understanding, a testament to the truth that real beauty is recognized not by crowds, but by the heart that truly sees.